Hello. I never thought my life would take a turn this wild, but here I am, spilling it all because, honestly, keeping it bottled up is worse. Let's rewind a bit. My name's Ryan, I'm 34, and until 6 months ago, I thought my life was pretty normal. I've been married to Julia, 31, for 7 years. We live in a small but cozy house in the suburbs. I work in tech, and she's in marketing. Our life wasn't perfect. No life is, but we had routines, laughter, and what I believed was a strong foundation. That is, until the cracks started showing. It began innocently enough. Julia had a new co-worker, Darren. She mentioned him in passing a few times, the way you might talk about a colleague you grab coffee with. He was nice, helpful, and, apparently, good at brainstorming ideas. I didn't think much of it. Why would I? But then, she started staying later at work. At first, it was once or twice a week, then it became almost daily. She'd come home tired, distracted, and different. Something was off, but I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we trusted each other. Or so I thought. Fast forward to one particular Friday evening. I got a text from a friend of mine, Liam, who also happens to work in the same building as Julia. "Hey, saw Julia leaving with some guy," the message read. I felt my stomach tighten but brushed it off. Colleagues leave together all the time, right? I asked her casually about her day that night, but her answers were clipped and vague. Something in her tone told me to stay alert. Over the next month, I noticed other things. Her phone, which used to be left around the house, was now always in her hand or face down on the counter. She'd giggle while texting, something I hadn't seen her do in years. And let's not even talk about the sudden extra attention she started paying to her appearance. She bought new dresses, changed her perfume, and even started going to the gym regularly. I wanted to believe this was all for us, that she was just improving herself. But deep down, I knew better. Then came the breaking point. A random Tuesday, I left work early because of a canceled meeting. I thought I'd surprise Julia by grabbing dinner and catching her before her late night. When I pulled into our driveway, though, there was a car parked across the street, an unfamiliar black sedan. My first thought was a delivery guy, or maybe a neighbor's guest, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Quietly, I let myself into the house. The moment I stepped inside, I heard them, soft laughter and whispers coming from the living room. My heart dropped. I moved closer, careful not to make a sound, until I could peek around the corner. There she was, sitting on the couch, leaning way too close to a guy I immediately recognized from her work photos, Darren. They weren't doing anything outright, but the way they were looking at each other, the casual intimacy, was undeniable. My chest tightened, rage and disbelief swirling inside me. I took a breath, pulled out my phone, and snapped a photo from behind the wall. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I needed proof. Before I could figure out my next move, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Maggie, Darren's wife. "I know about Darren and Julia," the text read. My mind reeled. Was this real? How did she even get my number? Before I could reply, another message popped up. "We need to talk." Maggie and I met the next day at a quiet cafe. She looked as frazzled as I felt, her eyes puffy like she hadn't slept in days. Turns out, she'd been suspicious of Darren for months. He was always working late or traveling for conferences, but she caught a glimpse of their texts, just enough to confirm her worst fears. Maggie wasn't looking for sympathy. No, she had a different idea in mind. "I want revenge," she said, her voice cold and deliberate. "They think they've gotten away with this, but they're about to learn otherwise." "What do you mean?" I asked, my mind still trying to process everything. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "You and I," she said, "we're going to make them regret it. They broke their vows, and now we'll break them. Together." I sat there staring at Claire's message, my mind racing. The proposition she just laid out wasn't subtle, and it certainly wasn't something I'd ever expected to hear. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend it never happened, but another part, the part still seething from Megan's betrayal, couldn't let it go. Revenge. It was a dangerous word, one I never thought I'd entertain. But sitting there alone in that motel room, I realized that Claire's offer wasn't just about payback for her. It was a chance for me to take control of something when everything else felt like it was spiraling out of it. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the chaos of my personal life. Megan had called me several times since I'd left, her messages swinging wildly between anger and desperation. "You're being immature, Adam. We need to talk. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can't we just move past this? If you're not even willing to work on this, maybe you never loved me in the first place." I deleted every message without responding. Her words meant nothing now. Meanwhile, Claire and I continued to text, though we avoided the topic of her initial message. Instead, we leaned on each other to process the fallout of what our spouses had done. "Did Megan reach out to you?" Claire asked one evening. "Yeah," I replied. "She's trying to justify it, acting like it's my fault she cheated." Claire sent back a bitter laugh emoji. "Jason did the same thing. He said I didn't make him feel wanted. Can you believe that?" "Sounds like they're reading from the same script," I replied. Her next message hit harder than I expected. "I hate that they get to hurt us and walk away like nothing happened." So did I. The next time I saw Claire, it was unplanned. I'd gone to a park near the coffee shop where we'd first met, needing a break from the sterile walls of my motel room. I didn't expect to see her sitting on a bench, staring out at the pond. "Hey," I said, walking up cautiously. She looked up, surprised but not unhappy to see me. "Hey, Adam. Fancy meeting you here." I sat down beside her, and for a while, we didn't say much. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was reflective, heavy with everything we weren't saying. Eventually, Claire broke the silence. "Do you ever feel like you don't even recognize the person you married anymore?" "All the time," I admitted. "Megan used to be the one person I could trust. Now I can't even look at her without wondering what else she's lying about." Claire nodded, her expression distant. "Same with Jason. It's like everything I thought I knew about him was a lie." Her voice cracked on the last word, and before I knew it, I'd reached out, my hand resting lightly on hers. "You didn't deserve this, Claire. None of it." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. That moment was the beginning of something we couldn't take back. Over the next few weeks, our texts became more frequent, more personal. Claire wasn't just an ally anymore. She was someone who understood me in a way no one else could. The pain, the anger, the betrayal. We were carrying the same load, and somehow, sharing it made it easier to bear. One evening, as I sat alone in my motel room, my phone buzzed with a new message from her. "I meant what I said, Adam. About what I want." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming something we'd both lost: our dignity, our self-worth, our sense of control. I typed back slowly, my fingers trembling. "Are you sure?" Her reply came almost instantly. "Yes. I need this. Don't you?" I didn't hesitate this time. "Then let's do it." The plan was simple. Meet at a hotel far enough away from both our homes that no one would recognize us. Claire booked the room, and I agreed to meet her there after work. The day of, I was a mess of nerves and anticipation. Part of me still wondered if this was the right thing to do, but the anger bubbling beneath the surface drowned out any doubts. Megan had made her choice. Jason had made his. Now it was our turn. When I arrived at the hotel, Claire was already there, waiting for me in the lobby. She looked different, more confident, more alive. "Hey," she said, her voice steady but soft. "Hey," I replied, my own voice betraying the storm of emotions swirling inside me. We didn't say much as we rode the elevator to the room. The silence between us was heavy, charged with anticipation and unspoken agreement. When the door closed behind us, Claire turned to me, her expression both vulnerable and resolute. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded. "Are you?" "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We crossed a line that night, one we couldn't uncross. It wasn't about love or passion. It was about reclaiming something that had been stolen from us. For the first time since discovering Megan's betrayal, I felt like I was in control again. The next morning, as I left the hotel and headed back to my motel, the reality of what I'd done started to sink in. I didn't regret it, not yet, but I knew this was only the beginning of the fallout. Claire and I had set something in motion, and there was no telling where it would lead. Leaving the hotel that morning, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. The satisfaction was simple. Megan and Jason weren't the only ones who could cross boundaries. The dread? That was harder to explain. I knew this wasn't over. Not for Megan, not for Jason, not for Claire, and certainly not for me. Claire and I didn't speak much after that night, at least not immediately. She sent me a short text, "Thank you. I don't regret it." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Me neither." But the truth was more complicated. A few days later, Megan cornered me in the kitchen during one of her attempts to force a conversation. I'd been staying at the house sporadically, using work as an excuse to avoid her whenever possible. "You can't keep ignoring me, Adam," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm not ignoring you," I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee. "I'm just done pretending we have anything to talk about." She scoffed, crossing her arms. "You're seriously going to throw away everything we've built over one mistake?" "One mistake?" I said, finally turning to face her. "Is that what you're calling months of sneaking around with Jason? A mistake?" Her face flushed, but she didn't back down. "It didn't mean anything. It was just, I don't know, an escape. It wasn't about you. Maybe not for you," I shot back, my voice rising. "But it was for me." She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "And before you ask, yes, I know about the hotel. I know about the texts, the nights you said you were working late. I know everything, Megan." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might apologize. But instead, she said the one thing that sealed the end of our marriage. "Well, maybe if you'd been more present, I wouldn't have needed someone else." That night, I packed my things and left for good. In the weeks that followed, the fallout spread like wildfire. Claire and I didn't plan to tell our spouses about what we'd done, but secrets have a way of coming to light. It was Jason who found out first. He'd been snooping through Claire's phone, ironic, considering his own track record, and found one of our text exchanges. The message wasn't explicit, but it was clear enough. He knew. He showed up at my workplace that afternoon, red-faced and ready for a fight. "You think you can just sleep with my wife and get away with it?" he spat, his voice low but dangerous. I stood my ground, my own anger bubbling to the surface. "Funny, that's exactly what you did to me." Jason's fist clenched, but he didn't swing. Instead, he stormed off, muttering threats under his breath. Megan found out shortly after. Whether Jason told her or she pieced it together herself, I didn't care. She showed up at my motel one night, her face a mix of fury and disbelief, not bothering to lie. I did. Her hands flew to her mouth, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But then the anger returned. "You're disgusting," she hissed. "You think that makes us even?" "No," I said, stepping closer. "It doesn't. But it sure as hell makes me feel better." The divorce was inevitable, but it was also brutal. Megan fought me on everything. The house, the savings, even the damn furniture. She painted herself as the victim, conveniently ignoring her role in the destruction of our marriage. Meanwhile, Claire's marriage to Jason didn't fare much better. From what I heard, Jason moved out within a month, leaving Claire to pick up the pieces. In the end, none of us walked away unscathed. Megan got the house, though the memories of what happened there probably haunted her as much as they did me. I ended up in a dingy one-bedroom apartment, living paycheck to paycheck while trying to rebuild my life from scratch. Claire and I stayed in touch for a while, but whatever connection we'd shared was unsustainable. It had been born out of anger and pain, not love or anything lasting. We parted ways amicably, both understanding that we needed to move forward on our own. As for Megan and Jason, I don't know where they are now, and I don't care. From what little I heard through mutual friends, their affair didn't survive the fallout. Whatever fantasy they built together crumbled once reality set in. But knowing that didn't make my life any easier. Rebuilding after something like this isn't a straight path. There are days when I feel like I'm making progress, when the weight of everything feels lighter. And then there are days when the anger and regret come rushing back, reminding me of what I lost and what I gave up in the name of revenge. Do I regret what I did with Claire? Not exactly. In that moment, It gave me the clarity I needed to walk away from a toxic situation, but it didn't fix anything. Revenge doesn't heal wounds. It just gives you new ones to deal with. Life goes on, though. Slowly, painfully, but it does. I don't know what the future holds, but one thing is certain. I'm done looking back. Goodbye.